Magdalene. Welcome to this class. First off, this is not a technology class. Second, it's not a scientific method class either. Those things kind of got a little mixed up, I think. But I think you're in for a treat. And maybe some of you have heard of Storybonding. I did a little work with Kingdom of Adenvelt as they were setting up their new website. And then in the Kingdom of the Outlands, we've been using it, especially in our Chatelaines office. But now with all of our Kingdom officers, as they use it to redo their handbooks and that sort of thing. So story bonding is it's a framework, right? So it's a structure so that all the things that you're learning today, it would actually, and you're kind of like, oh, it's almost overwhelming. I don't know what to do, right? We have all these ideas. So story bonding gives you this umbrella so that you can start to put things into place and really use them all in your recruiting and retention strategy. And it's using one of the most powerful tools that we have, a tool that we use in the SCA all the time, which is storytelling, right? And the hero's journey as kind of the model. There's three parts. There's putting together your story bonding script, which we will actually do today for all of you. The second part is then assessing your script and looking at your organization and seeing like where are there holes. And then the third part is coming up with new ideas to address some of those areas that you might be missing. So we'll do part one today. And first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you the basic story bonding script, and we'll look at each part. I'll explain each part. And then what we'll do is I'll have you start to think about filling out a script for you and what you're doing in your group and all of those different areas. There are 6 parts to this story bonding script, or the hero's journey, right? There is, number one, your hero. And really the overarching question is, what is the story you want to invite people into? So the first thing is the hero, right? So a lot of organizations present themselves as the hero. As we know, though, it's really the participants that you're inviting into your story. And really, I like to say that the SCA is in the hero business, right? Like we have such a great story that we can invite people into as far as all the things that we do. But there are many different kinds of heroes within our organization. So it could be people who they haven't joined our group yet, right? So we're kind of looking at what are those groups that we want to recruit from. It could be those people who have found our group and we want to help them get through and engage and become a part of the SCA. It could be kingdom or local officers. So if you're a kingdom officer, it could be your local officers that could be the hero. It could be people in the service track or in a martial track. So it's really interesting to think about, like, for you in your area, who are the heroes that you want to focus on? The second is who are searching for, right? So when people join an organization, they're usually searching for something. As we know in the SCA, a lot of times it's community. So having opportunities for people to join into community. Sometimes it's the historical aspect. Sometimes it's the martial aspect. But really trying to talk to folks and really figure out, like, what are they searching for? What are they trying to connect with? And how do we do that better, right? Are we doing the things that we need to be doing to help meet the needs of those folks as they're searching for that? They meet a guide, right? And that could be different people in the SCA. It could be a peer. It could be somebody who has been a new person for a year, and now they're ready to bring other new people in. But really having those guides know the story bonding journey here and being able to help direct people into this journey. And so that's number 4, is the journey. And this is kind of the big piece. So are our groups organized in a way that help people grow, right? Are we doing the things that we need to do so that our activities and our practices are helping people grow in the directions that we're wanting them to? A lot of groups do all kinds of things. They're trying to recruit, they're trying to do different things. but they're not quite sure what's going on, but really focusing on as people as they come into the SCA, are they growing in the ways that we hope they will? So number 5 is grow. We have to kind of write down, how do we want them to grow, right? And we definitely have ideas in the SCA. We want them to be engaged and experienced, but we have service areas, we have martial areas, we have arts areas. So we have all these different tracks in the SCA, and really getting a sense of what does that look like. We also have nobility, which is our AOA level. We also have peerage levels. So we have all these things to help us with that and be transformed into, right? So what do we want them to look like? What do we want to transform our heroes into? Which is often an interesting question. So just as a couple of examples of this, in the Kingdom of the Outlands, we've done a couple of things. So one, we started to look at knighthood and what is the job of a knight? And so several knights got together and wrote a document called On Knighthood. And basically it's like, here's the job of a knight. And that was really addressing number 6. What do we want to transform our martial folks into? And we're not talking about the award per se or of getting a peerage, but peer-like folks, right? So a little difference. And so it's this is a wonderful document that has all the things that really, for new knights, it really shows them like, hey, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And for unbelted folks or people on their journey, it really helps them go, oh, this is kind of, these are the things I need to be doing. But the interesting thing is, as a fighter in the SCA, is there's not a lot of fighting in that document, right? All these things that we want people to do. But when we look at our fighter practice, we focus almost 99% on fighting, right? So really, if we want to align and be able to transform people and help them grow in all these areas, we should really be having like a chivalric practice where not only do you fight, but you do all these other aspects so that you are growing as this kind of martial person in the SCA. So hopefully that makes sense. The other thing that we've done, Lord Ilo is here. He's the current Kingdom Chatelaine. But instead of doing the traditional newcomer handbook where it has a ton of information and newcomers can already look that up, what we did is we asked, what do we want to transform our new people into if they've been in the SCA for a year, which is really like the AOA level person. It doesn't mean that they would get the award, but that level, what do we want people to do? And we created a handbook that is a quest. So basically it's up to the new people then to go and attend different events, to go and talk to different people, to gather the information that they need to explore the different areas of the SCA, so that by the time that they complete that handbook or the quest book, that really they'll be at a place that would be an award of arms level in the SCA, because they participated and done all of these things. So we really wanted to help them feel like they're the hero, they're invited into this journey, they're taking agency in, as far as doing what they need to do to get into the SCA. And then they're transformed into basically this engaged, knowledgeable person in the SCA. So that is the basic story bonding script or structure. So like I said, there's kind of 3 parts, and we'll do this next part next, where you kind of break down and start to fill in these areas, but you put together a script. The second, then, once you kind of have a script, you would go like, hey, what are the areas that we're the weakest at, right? What are the areas that we just don't really know? So it might be like you look at where they will grow in an area and you're like, oh gosh, we don't even know like how we want our participants to grow, right? We've never really written that down. Pre-pandemic, we were using this model to help grow our heavy community in our barony. We basically had 2 fighters, myself and another that were going to practice. But one of the things that I really found out in the SCA is we didn't really know who our heroes were, as far as we didn't keep track of who our fighters were. we didn't have a good list of who are the fighters in the group. And when new people came in, they would come in, we put them in armor, and then they'd fight and they'd leave. We'd be like, well, I hope they come back, which maybe they would or maybe they weren't. So that's where we started, is who are our heroes? So it was, who are all the fighters in the group? Who are all the new people that are coming in and want to fight? Let's get their information. Let's check in with them. And we went from 2 fighters to 40 fighters, and we were like attacking other groups and having fun and having this really great, robust fighter group, which really helped us going into the pandemic, because we kept that throughout the pandemic. So that was just an example of like, oh, we have a hole in our script here, and how do we fix that? And we fixed that by coming up with the idea of, let's keep track of who our heroes are. All right. So let's see. What, let's see, where am I? Okay. Any quick questions before we move on? Anything in the chat? And then Lord Ilo will actually be doing a workshop after this workshop. We're really walking through what we all developed and what he put together as far as that hero's quest. So it's a great example. So what I would like you to do next, and this is a little more of the workshop part. First thing, let's look at our script. And what I want you to do is to write down on a piece of paper. I want you to write down and think about if you were going to like grow and retain an area in the SCA that you're interested in. Like I said, it could be all kinds of different areas, different levels. Who are the heroes for that? So jot down, maybe you're into archery and you're trying to get archery going. So who are those folks? And you don't have to know them all by name, but like identifying people who want to go and do archery.
And Sir Alexander, do you want people to go ahead and unmute at this point and ask questions verbally? Because they should be able to.
Yeah, let's do that. So let's jot down, and then we'll talk a little bit about our heroes, and then we'll kind of go through this, and I'll keep an eye on time. But we'll go through this and do each one. So.
And just a gentle reminder, we are recording, so if you don't wish to have your voice recorded, please text instead. But since this is meant to be interactive, we welcome you to show your video screen and also speak.
So what are some of the heroes that people came up with?
So I'm kind of interested in your class. So,
yeah, it's kind of different.
So when you say that, are you referencing, or should we be thinking about heroes within our SCA group?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So your area might be arts and sciences, right? So then it's like, well, how do we recruit and engage more people in arts and sciences, right? So your heroes would be maybe prospective ANS folks, right? So then thinking about, gosh, do we go to craft fairs? Do we go to like what do they call those?
Run fairs?
Well, maker fairs, right? Where people
right.
Stuff, right? Or is it more like we have artisans within the group, and maybe we should really kind of, who are those folks, right? Should we make a list of all the artisans within the group, right? So really identifying for that area, who are the heroes in that group? Could be just general newcomers, right? So say somebody's a baron and baroness, whatever, they might be thinking about general newcomers coming to the group or in the group. As a peer, it could be like, okay, in my area, right? So as a Pelican, I might be thinking about service folks. What does that path look like? Who are those folks as far as the heroes?
There is a question in the chat. It is from Kademan. It says, is the hero the person who is doing that thing now, or people to reach out to become heroes?
Could be either one, right? So it could be what you want to focus on. For some things, it's inviting people into the SCA. sometimes it's already people in the SCA. So for our kingdom right now, our kingdom officers are the guides, right? Their heroes are actually local officers because they're trying to get their local officers to be engaged and participants. So obviously those people are already in the SCA, but what is the story that kingdom officers want to invite them into so that they are engaged in participating? If that makes sense. Other people have ideas of who they would want to reach out to. I mean, this is just we're playing with it.
Well, I'm a bard, so I look towards like the whiskey bards, one of them, which is my husband. So that sort of doesn't count because I'm biased, but they are recorded musicians with CDs. They perform both in the SCA and without the SCA. And so I kind of look to them as the ideal of what I would like to be as a bard.
Magdalene could be looking at either like the heroes are those folks that we want to invite into Bardic, right? Like those people who have kind of been around the fringes. They aren't really participating at the moment, right? So that might be the heroes that she wants to work on. Or it could be like just bards in general, like who are our bards? And let's get them all together, right? So those might be the heroes.
So I am delving in multiple different disciplines throughout the SCA, but the one that is near and dear to me is definitely heavy fighting. So whenever I think about heroes, I think about the newer fighter who shows up to the fighter practice or to the war practice and kind of tapping them on the shield and being like, hey man, thanks for being here. Do you want to come help me on this side? You know, and then after the engagement, make sure that I pay attention to them and kind of be like, man, dude, you really stuck it to that guy. And just like things like that. And then I'll see you at the next practice. Like that to me is building up more heroes because they're going to continue to come. They've been encouraged. They fought alongside you. And, you know, there's different examples of that, you know, in ANS, in archery, rapier, including Magdalene, I'll say Bardic competition as well. The bards will swarm around you and be like, man, I really love that piece. Is that an original? Where did you hear that? And it's really important to build up those around you, even in a competition setting. Naturally, we want to perform our best, but if we're not building up those around us, there's no point because they're going to stop coming and then we're going to miss out on that person and we're going to miss out on the story that they have to tell. And yeah.
Yeah, thank
That
you.
makes sense.
Yeah, I love because and that's a great example of identifying who the heroes are, which are those new fighters, right? And Ilo being a guide and saying, hey, I'm going to help guide them into what's going on with the SCA and encourage them, right? So taking on that mentor role, even in that moment, just to say, hey, welcome and you belong here, right? Let's try the second one. So who is searching for something meaningful, right? So when you think about that possible bard or when you think about that new fighter, what are some of the things that they might be searching for, right? There's a reason, and this is really the motivation for them to show up. And if we're not helping to meet those needs for folks, maybe they'll go somewhere else. Maybe they'll find another group. Maybe they'll go play video games. Maybe they'll go to the movies or whatever, right? So we have to identify what are some of those things that these people are looking for. So jot down some ideas based off of your heroes.
Oh, Dorothea asks, in search of skills, or states, in search of skills, community, and experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great. And do you want me to show the screen again just so people can see?
I think back to how I was reached out to become a hero. Not really much of a ANS person, just primarily fighting. However, I saw someone paint their fencing mask and I thought that was really cool. So I reached out to a couple local artisans, and one of the Laurels invited me over, and we mapped everything out, and I was able to paint my mask with my badge. And so that was a moment where they were able to help me along my way. And so that is on the receiving end of the hero's journey rather than being the guide.
Yeah. One of the things I think that the SCA really provides for folks is an escape. When you're working a terrible job, 9 to 5, you're going to school, you're doing all these kind of real life, mundane, heavy things. It's almost like a fantasy book, right? Like Kingdom for Sale is what I always think about, where all of a sudden you can go and you can kind of leave that behind, and you can put on your garb and for a weekend just do something different, right? The phone goes away. You're sitting around a campfire, and part of that is like what we even call the dream. But having that be like this kind of wonderful escape from the regular world, I think is something that people are often looking for. And that's in a broader sense, right? Beyond just the skills of the SCA or having an interest in history, that sort of thing. Other folks, thoughts as far as what heroes who are coming into the SCA or into your area might be searching for?
Feel free to text in the chat or pipe up. Community for sure, shared nerd skills.
Yeah.
And that's Kedman. Yeah.
Yeah. So isn't that interesting, right? Like, we always know community. Are we doing a good job at making sure that those folks feel community from the first moment, right? That they're finding their people. So are we just allowing that to happen on their own? Or are we actually creating it to make that happen? Awesome. Let's do the third one. So they meet a guide. So the guides in the SCA, it's kind of, or in general, the guides are interesting because I think when you have your organization, your heroes go, they're transformed, and oftentimes they become the next guide, right? So if you're doing it well, then folks will feel like, and they will be trained throughout to be that welcoming person, to be that mentor, right? And to be that guide for others behind them. And it could mean that maybe they get an award, and that's a part of that award. It could mean just like they were a new person, they just went through this last year of being integrated into the SCA, and now they're going to be a great guide for other new people because it's been pretty new for them. So think about who are the guides in this script for your area, right? Like, so who are the bardic guides who will help bring in the new people? Who are the fighter guides? Doesn't mean they have to be the knights, right? Like, but who are those fighters who help the other newer fighters feel like they have a place, right? Who are the community people that when new people show up at an event, and if we really want them to feel community, actually go over and say, welcome, hello, I don't know you. This is my name. What are you interested in? Let me introduce you around, right? So who are those folks? It was kind of interesting as a Kingdom Chatelet, I was at an event and and there was a new person there, and all these peers kept coming over to me like, hey, can you go talk to that new person? And I'm like, hey, hospitality is one of the things that we do in the SCA, right? Like everybody, especially anybody that's gotten an AOA, that's a part of being a noble. And so we should all be able to go talk to that new person. It's not just for Chatelets, right? Like if we want to be a hospitable community, we all need to be good at saying hello, welcome, and let me introduce you to other folks.
Well, I did hear recently, because we in Atenveld have used the phrase, everyone's a Chatelaine in the recent past. And then more recently, I've heard, well, that's not necessarily accurate because there are the folks who really aren't comfortable peopling. There are the folks who have, that's just not their bailiwick. They don't feel comfortable. So So we have tried, at least in my barony in Tucson, Arizona, barony of Teriscathere, we have tried to have some folks who would step up to be the go-to so that we could tell everybody, hey, go to Magdalene or go to Fergus, and they can help the newcomer when we were without a chatelaine. We have a chatelaine currently, and so she's very helpful at our fighter practices for sure. So.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. One is, sure, especially when it comes to like PR, right? It's good to have certain people that are really good at PR. And those are kind of specialty jobs. But in my opinion, and we don't do a great job at training this, in my opinion, anybody that is AOA level in the SCA, like just like peerages, there are like things that we should be able to do. And one is hospitality. So even though folks, and the second is stewardship, right? Stewardship meaning growing and supporting the SCA. And so to me, those are things that we should be training people so that, of course, if they haven't been trained, they're going to be more uncomfortable. But as a lord or lady of the SCA, they really need to be hospitable and they need to have stewardship. And so they need to be able to walk over to a new person and say, hi, welcome. Have you heard of our group before? Right. So I'm on the side that in a way, not that we're all chatelaines, but that we're all nobles in the SCA, and that's a part of what being a noble in the SCA is hospitable and stewardship. So I'm on that side that everybody should have those skills. Of course, I was also a public speaking teacher at the college for 10 years, so I know that you can train these things, right? So we need to teach people, because even if you're nervous, it's really easy to say, hey, what is your interest? Let me introduce you to so-and-so. It's like 2 sentences, right? So, all right, let's do number 4, who invites them on a journey, right? So this is very interesting because the journey is the alignment of your organization. Are you doing the things like we just talked about, right? If we want everyone to be hospitable in the SCA, are we training people to be hospitable, right? So one of the things when I joined the SCA is when you saw somebody that was carrying baskets and stuff, you went and helped out. And that was a part of being in the SCA, right? So it was just a part of the culture. So if we want to train people, that a part of being a noble in the SCA is that when somebody comes in that's new, you go and say hello. That just becomes a part of the culture, but we got to train it, right? So the journey of a bard, right? What does that look like? So not just saying, hey, come and hang out with us, but how do we get you started in the bardic arts? How are you going to grow? Do we have regular practices? Do we have places where we're going to go and perform, or we're going to go and do bardic circles or whatever, right? Like, what does that even look like as far as that journey? And then who's the cohort or the fellowship of people that are going to go with them, right? So are we thinking about that? Unconnected. Yay. Right. So the guide, helps bring you in and then connected you to other folks. Yes. So the journey, I think, is really the part where, like, officers meeting, fighter practice. Are you training people to help them become peer-like in the SCA, or are you just having fighter practice, right? So we have these kind of virtues and ways that we want people to be noble or peer-like in the SCA, right? So beyond even paths of service or whatever, but how they act and participate in the SCA. Are we helping train those things? So really looking at what are our events, what are our practices, when do we get together? Are those things aligned to help our people grow, right? Which is kind of a big thing, because we could keep doing the same old thing all the time and people really aren't growing.
There's a couple of additional posts. I think you saw Caedmon's, but then Dorothea had one.
Yeah, getting people to recognize that there are many paths. And the paths can be difficult, right? Because that's a part of the journey. It's not a great movie if the path wasn't very difficult, right? And the SCA, it's a long hard path for a lot of folks, but it's rewarding, right? Because you do work so hard. But if people can't really tell what the path is, then it's like too much effort to like what's going on. You know, I'm kind of interested in helping out, maybe doing service, or I'm kind of interested in this rapier thing. So that's exactly right, Dorothea, as far as like having a clear vision of what these paths are. So like I said, by putting together on knighthood, it really says here's the path, right, to being more knightly in the SCA, whether you get the award or not, right? So I always like to throw the awards kind of out, but people can still strive towards being peer-like, even if they don't have the award, right? All right, number 5, where they will grow, right? So as fighters, as heavies, we want people to grow in their martial abilities. We also want them to be able to train and mentor others. So we want them to be teachers. We want them to build their own, you know, and to have their own kit. We want them to have some service, whether through martial areas or just to their group. We want them to have some arts, right? So that's why when people are knighted, they have these other people talk for them, right? We want them to be able to help out and know what the SCA is about, knowledgeable about the SCA as a whole, to be stewards of the SCA, all of these things, right? So really, it really is like, let's make a list. So Magdalene, you might think about like, what does that look like to grow into this higher level bard, right? Like, what are the things that your group would want to help people grow in, whether it's part of it might be just showing up, right? Like, well, if you show up, right, that's
Yeah.
how we grow, right? If we help you so that you can research and do a little research on the area that you're interested in as far as barding. So it might be a little research, might be in the actual like skill of bardic, right? It could be in mentoring other bards. It could be, right? So those are
Yes.
the things that you're like, hey, and once you know these concrete things, it's like, okay, let's look at our journey, right? Like, hey, is our journey getting us these skill sets, right? Or are we just meeting and kind of just hanging out and singing once in a while, right?
Exactly.
Or are we growing people, right?
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. And I've been in the SCA for 31 years. So, you know, as I've noticed in classes all throughout the day, we all evolve. We all find different interests in the context of the society. Some of us move from group to group or kingdom to kingdom. So we have to start over sometimes. There's a variety of, I mean, so in this journey path, if you move from one kingdom to another, you might have to go back a couple steps. You might have to go back to the beginning, depending on who you've networked with or who you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and our Pelicans, our service area is really struggling with this right now because service isn't as well defined in our kingdom, at least, right? They haven't really looked at like, how do we want people to grow in service? They haven't really looked at like, what do we want to transform people into? And so it's always like, well, do they do stuff, right? But how are we training people to run events? How are we training people to be officers? How are we training people to, because we're not doing classes. We don't have a track at events where we're like training people as they come together to do service, right? So really, service in our kingdom really needs to look at like, what is that journey and how do we want people to grow in their service? And really, service is something that in the mundane world is a huge commodity. You can write that on your resume if you can run events really well, right? If you can manage people really well. Like, these are like real world skills, and we're really good at them in the SCA, but we're not really great at training people in these areas, right? So this
Right.
is
And I agree with you. And I think what happened, I'm a Pelican over here in Adenvelt, and we just had about 6 of us get together because we realized after we had some hiccups at our recent coronation, and we had a very, very brand new event steward, and we had a newer person, newer peer assisting them. And And ultimately, they were little things, but you know how it goes.
Right.
And so all of us together said we should at least do a class. So we did do a recorded class, and I'll get Fergus or someone to send that to you so you can share it with the Pelicans and the Outlands.
Yeah.
Because the things are somewhat universal in terms of how to be an event steward, because we have the same exact problem. I think it's probably known worldwide that we
Right.
have that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can see how storybonding can really help
Yes, it's a
event
cool
service,
idea.
right? Yeah.
The
So
concept makes sense.
yeah. And Fergus is pretty familiar with this whole concept. So, and so then the last one is and be transformed into, right? So this is, when I walk into groups, I'm always asking this question: what are you transforming your folks into? And sometimes this can be kind of nebulous, right? So I've worked in different areas. I work at a community college and taught classes. And so I often ask, like, what do you want to transform students into? And they're like, oh, graduates, it's kind of, and so if you don't kind of have a concrete, like, it can make it tough. So really trying to figure out, what do you want to transform people into? Yeah, officer handoffs can be rough, right? If there isn't a great training system, if there isn't, so that's what we're doing in the kingdom of the Outlands, is really trying to figure out. So they are taking this model to do a lot of their officer handbooks, right? So as new people come in, they're the heroes. They're becoming this new officer, right? What does that training look like? The old officer's the guide. What are they going to transform into? Which is interesting to think about as far as kingdom officers, right? Like, and local officers. Not that, oh, you got to do your time. What kind of story is that? Oh, like, and we always say that, we always downplay, oh, well, it's not that much work, and but we just need somebody, right? What a terrible story to invite people into, versus, hey, this is an awesome opportunity. You really like, the group really needs this, so you're really adding value to the group, and you're going to start here, and we're going to train you, and by the time you're done, you're going to be an expert in this area, and people will be able to come to you even when you're not this officer anymore, to ask questions, because they know that you are an expert in this area and can help people out, right? That is a much more compelling story than we just need somebody to fill the spot, right?
And more often than not, we do have that kind of panic turnover, unfortunately. Um, I I think that the pandemic kind of gave us a different perspective. And we realized that a lot of things we just did automatically. We assumed we'll see you next event. We'll see you next war. I mean, our kingdom is still, and probably yours as well, rippling from Estrella is gone. What do you do when the biggest war is gone?
Right.
You go to Pensic. That's that. No, we're trying, of course, to grow the War of the Phoenix, and of course, it's only in its second year, hasn't even happened yet in next month. But we all got used to things just magically happening. And as we all have gotten a little older as well, Sir so-and-so always did that. Mistress, what's her name, always did that. And if they pass away or they retire or they move, sometimes things get lost.
Yeah.
Because we hadn't figured out a transition. But I do think that, for example, this symposium and other ideas like it are kind of a regrowth, a new way of reaching folks. So I appreciate your input here. The story bonding is a really cool concept.
Yeah. Well, and to touch on a couple of things there, right? Like, when we do events, once again, what's the story we're inviting people into? Are we inspiring them? Are we marketing it in a way? Or have we set it up in a way that people are going to grow at our events, right? Or are we just going through the motions and doing the same events we've always done, right? So it's interesting to take story bonding in all the different areas that we have in the SCA and to really ask those questions. What's the story we want to invite people into? And then build from there, right? Like, okay, this is what we really want. This is the exciting thing, right? More of the Phoenix, the idea of like rebirth, right?
Right.
And that people are going to go there and maybe have as much fun as they can possibly have, right? Like versus other things in the past, right? So what's the story? And then how are we going to set up our event? And how are we going to advertise that event to really let people know, hey, this is what's going on and this is why it's exciting. And they're already like marking their calendars on what they're going to want to be doing and all of those sort of things, right? Yeah, so how do we do this with our events? How do we do this with our service? How do we do this with our martial areas? I was just talking to our New Kingdom archery captain, and he's like, man, archery's kind of gone down. Well, let's talk about it. Let's figure out what's the script. Who are the archers that we're inviting in to the story? What does it look like as far as their journey? How do we change some of those things? So that's kind of, once you have your script, and hopefully you guys jotted some things down, right? As far as here's the heroes, we'll use Magdalene, we'll use yours, right? Like people who are interested in Bardic, who are searching for a place to develop their talents. So maybe that's what they're searching for, right? Meets the local bards, who invites them into this group where they will learn more about the history of Bardic, their skills in Bardic, find a group, participate together, and be transformed into an Aiden Belt bard, right? Or whatever it is, right? So that would be like a script. And then the next part then is you take that home and you go, okay, so are all of these areas good? Do we know who our heroes are? Do I need to dig in a little more to what they're searching for? Do our guides know what's going on as far as our journey? Do we have activities that are actually helping our bards grow? Or are we just getting together and singing, right? Or whatever? Are we actually training people? Do we actually know how we want them to grow? So do we have a list of the ways that we want to train folks? And what does that look like when people get to that transformation, right? When they become that bard that is experienced and able to do their thing. Questions from folks? I think it's just a different idea than maybe a lot of the stuff in this whole workshop, right? Hopefully my hope is that all the other classes that you take, there's probably a place for it to fit into Storybonding as far as this structure for how to not only recruit people, but to retain them, right? Because a lot of the stuff that we talk about are strategies, right? Like demos or inviting in other groups, all of those sort of things, great. But to really organize and figure out for your group and what you want to do, what is the journey? Are you aligned to use these strategies to help people really engage in the SCA? Is the story you want them to be invited into compelling enough that they'll be like, oh, I don't want to go to bowling. I don't want to go to your house to play D&D. I want to go to this practice. I want to go do the SCA because it's so cool. Yes. So Ilo will be teaching this next class. And so basically, and he'll explain it more, but basically it's like, what do we want? Our heroes being brand new people in the SCA, right? And we wanted to transform them into AOA level folks, right? So that's what are we transforming them into? So then the handbook is basically like, here's how we want them to grow. Here's the journey. The guide is other folks that are inviting them in, right? So it's a hands-on here, example of Storybonding. Let me also give you a couple things. Here's my book that you can look at for free. And then here's my email if you have questions. I'm a teacher, so I'm very time-oriented. And feel free, I love talking about this stuff. Like I said, I've worked with Kingdom of Aidenvelt, Kingdom of the Outlands, and other groups outside of the SCA. It's fun to be able to try all this out in the SCA, but I've worked on it with other groups. And it's a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for your information. This is exciting. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been exciting to see how people have been using it. I know Kingdom of Adenvelt used it somewhat in their web design, right? Because it was like, hey, you're gonna come in and what's your path? What's your journey, right? Like, do you need to go to events? Do you need to find your local group? So that was really our Kingdom website just did the same thing, right? So it's really like, hey,
Oh,
newcomers. Yeah, because websites are notoriously terrible, right? Like
oh yes. Oh
it's
yes.
meant for members, right? There's no pictures. You go, it's the color of the kingdom, and it's just like information, right? So for a brand new person, they're like, what? So our new website looks great. Has that story bonding feel as far as, ooh, the SCA is fun, you know, and here's the path, right? So it's acting as a guide. Yeah. So yeah, feel free to reach out. A lot of fun stuff. And then reach out if you have questions, all of those sort of things. And thanks for coming to the workshop.